Your life is going the way you want it. Maybe you're starting to get opportunities that you only dreamt of. But what happens when you get a life-altering diagnosis? Furthermore, what happens after you survive? Join me as I talk to author, actor, artist, producer, and cancer survivor, Edward Miskie, on this Extraordinary People episode of True Crime and Authors.
Welcome to True Crime and Authors Podcast, where we bring two passions together. The show that gives new meaning to the old adage, truth is stranger than fiction. Here's your host, David McClam.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the episode of True Crime and Authors. Of course, I'm your man, David McClam. Hey, if you guys haven't already, make sure that you follow me on all of our social media. That is found in one link to a link tree in the show description. All right, guys, so I've been telling you guys for a while that we were starting another segment of the show where I talk to some extraordinary people that's been through some extraordinary things and survived. And I have my first guest for that today. Let me tell you a little bit about who we have. He has spent the last 17 years in New York City writing, producing, and performing. He is a co-producer on the feature film Ladylike that releases in 2024 and creator and executive producer of his upcoming musical episodic based on his book, Cancer, Musical Theater, and Other Chronic Illnesses. He is the creator of BariToned, does Broadway's Leading Ladies, and the recipient of the 2011 AEA Roger Sturtevant Award. You can also catch him, if you haven't already, in Devil Vac Season 1, Episode 4 of the Hulu seasonal miniseries Bite Size Halloween. In 2021, he released a dance pop album under the name Edward the First, titled Renaissancing, that is available to stream anywhere you listen to music. And he wants you to know there is a video, and it is epic, and it is true because I have checked it out. He is an author, actor, artist, producer, and cancer survivor. Please welcome to the show, Edward Miskie. Edward, welcome to the show.
Hi, David. That was quite the intro. Thank you.
Well, I'm happy to have you on the show. We're going to talk all about your cancer journey, but I just want to introduce you to the audience. You are a very talented man.
I have done Broadway shows all over the country, and it's fascinating that, you get this narrative as a young performer of oh, I'm going to move to New York City to do theater. And then 95% of the time you're like, I'm in Indiana doing theater because they just kind of chuck you out to different places through the audition cycle. So, it's been fun. I've been very lucky. I worked a lot and I got to travel around the country and in some cases the world performing various shows and getting to be a star and all that. So, it was great. It was great. I loved it while I was doing it.
So you say while you were, are you not doing that any longer?
No, I've kind of stepped away from it. It was something that I was looking at leaving anyway. The show that you had mentioned, BariToned does Broadway's Leading Ladies. That was something that I had created that I toured around the country for a while. And that kind of was coming to some really good momentum right when shutdown happened. And then a couple of our members moved out of the city. We had one pass away, unfortunately. And, it really took the wind out of my sails. So, beyond that and a couple industry specific things that have happened between now and then, I'm just not terribly into getting my foot back in the game.
On that note, what's going on with your acting? Because I did check out that episode on Hulu. Fabulous, by the way. A little bit too short. When it says bite size, it really was bite size. I think it's about 2 minutes. Yeah. I've also watched your reel that you have on your website, and you are a great actor. In that reel, you showed many different facets: comedy, romantic, serious. Where are you at with your acting right now?
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate hearing that. I really do. Well, I mean, so when you're bitten by the bug sometimes and you leave, sometimes it tries to bite you back and bring you back into the circle. So, I try not to talk about this too much, but the fact of the matter is that last year, I was hired to be one of the stars on the Chicago national tour of the musical Chicago. And, as what happens sometimes in the industry, I was replaced at the last minute with really not a whole lot of explanation or reasoning. So that was a thing that I kind of was excited about that then ended up not happening. And that for me kind of put the cap on, I don't want to do this anymore. I have so many other things that I'm doing that I would like to focus on, that distracting myself with things that are not in the end going to serve me doesn't make sense. So, it is what it is, and it happened, and it hurt a lot. And I spent a lot of time sitting in that space and, kind of recalibrating how I felt about it. And I have just kind of come to the conclusion that the book that I've written and am very proud of and worked very, very hard on is the vehicle that I want to ride on right now. It's mine. I don't have to answer to anybody else. It is mine, and I can do whatever I want with it, and I can run as hard and as fast as I want with it. And that is more appealing to me than being someone else's show pony.
I can totally understand that. I'm a musician. I've played drums for over 45 years. I've been in bands, and I think we all run that gamut where you just kind of outgrow it. You outgrow the childhoodness of it. You outgrow the arguing. And then you just want to do something more. And now with technology, it's even easier now to be a musician, even a voice actor, because you could do all of this stuff from home, just with the stuff I'm using now to interview you.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I look at my dad, he's in his 60s and he has played guitar for his whole damn life and was in rock bands here and there and whatever. And then, he had kids with my mom, and they had to come to a place where that was no longer going to be a full-time component. And now that we're all grown and out of the house, and he retired early and whatever, he's a full-time touring, performing musician with multiple albums online. And, he's really good. And he now in his 60s gets to finally do that, and it's by his rules. And that would not be possible without the technology we have now. And so I've kind of taken a cue from that and started to kind of redo that myself. I was doing that as a teenager and moved to New York, and it was infinitely harder to make shit happen while I was not at home with my music network back home. And only now, like the last year, I've really leaned into it and was like, this is fun. I like doing it. I'm going to do it.
So after all of that, you hit kind of a bug in your life. So let me say, first of all, congratulations, 10-year cancer free. A lot of people don't make it out of cancer, but you did. It looks like you was hit with the rare aggressive non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. So let's talk a little bit about that. I guess my first question would be, what was it like after you found out that you had the cancer? What happened to you in life at that point?
I mean, a couple things happened. I think it goes without saying that the rug was pulled out from underneath me, and it was like, and I really literally fought and also internally fought to figure out how I could still have the life I was having and be a cancer patient. And in the end, I mean, it was not possible. So it was kind of weirdly enough where I'm at again right now, where you have to let go of that to do what you need to do right now. And, so I'm having a lot of mirroring this year of like, oh, I remember what this feels like, because, there was a scenario I write about in the book where I'm sitting in the hospital. Things are not going well. The team doesn't know what to do. They're trying everything. Nothing's working. And I have to have this really hard conversation with my oncologist that's like, this isn't going how we thought. It's a lot harder than we thought, and we don't know if you're going to make it. And right before that conversation happened, I got a phone call from a theater that I had been dying to work at for years that was going to hire me for the whole summer. And I had to tell them no. And they just assumed that by me saying no, I was already booked and working somewhere else. And so like that really, really hurt, to have to be able to face that. And so letting go of the life I had before was one of the first and hardest things I had to do. I had a lot of career momentum. I was getting called in by the bigger casting houses in New York without asking, without an agent. They were asking me to come in, and it felt really great. And I felt like, there were so many possibilities around the corner, and then that just kind of got, knocked down, which is something cancer definitely did. It knocked me down a few pegs.
So did you stop immediately, or did you have the thought that maybe you can deal with your cancer and still work at the same time?
I mean, I stopped immediately, but I was still getting calls for things. I think I had like 3 or 4 offers come in within the first 3 months of being in the hospital that I had to say no to. And so it was that bug of being like, come back, you don't leave us. So, it was kind of both. Like I had to stop. I didn't have another choice, but then having to like look at the things that were coming my way and really contend with the fact that I was not able to do them, that's a hard thing to look at, to the point where I was like, oh, well, there's a hospital near. I was looking up like, oh, this is where the location is. Like there's a hospital near there. Like maybe on my days off, I can go get chemo. Like, how does that work? This role isn't that difficult. Like I could, and I was really trying to rationalize how I was going to make that work.
Who were you before you heard that you were cancer? Who was there with Miskie before?
I was kind of a know-it-all bitch, to be honest. I, looking back, don't think I would have liked who that person turned into. So in a way, like cancer saved me in that sense. I was young, I was pretty, I had a lot going for me, and I had this entitlement where like, of course my career is going to work out. Duh. And I treated people that way. And like, I still had friends and, I guess I had friends and I don't know why they were hanging out with me necessarily. Like I had them and I was just like, of course they're hanging out with me. I'm a star, like I'm the star of the show. Why don't you want to hang out with me? And that was kind of what my headspace was back then, which, I don't know if I'd want to, I don't know if I'd want to hang out with him now. So it really kind of grounded me a lot more. Like I said, cancer will knock you down a few pegs. Gave me a better sense of empathy, I guess. Like you hear all the time, like, oh, be nice to everyone. You never know what they're going through. And then I became the person that I didn't know what that person was going through. And it was very much like, oh, okay, this is what they mean. So I'm just going to be nicer to people now.
There's a very popular country song by Tim McGraw called Live Like You Were Dying, which is the story of that young man finds out he has a life-threatening diagnosis and immediately he changed. Did you kind of feel like that song a little bit?
I remember listening to that song during that period of time. I actually think it's about his dad. Like live like you're dying and make sure that you get everything done that you want to do in this lifetime, which is, Tim McGraw is a multi-millionaire 10 times over. So that's easy for him to say. But, would I love to go do like a world tour on an airplane and go to all the places I want to go to? Sure. Can I pay for it? No. So, that song definitely resonated with me. I very specifically remember listening to it during that period of time.
Now that you have cancer, of course, they got to talk about treatment. Usually treatment is centered around chemotherapy, which you and I both know chemo pretty much kills the body to rebuild it. What was the biggest change in your life that you saw when you started treatment?
Well, treatment-wise, I was supposed to have six to 8 rounds of chemo. I had 4 of them and none of them worked. So we redirected to radiation for 30 days, which did work, and then that got rolled into a stem cell transplant. So I had the full gamut of everything. And I think that the one thing that changed the most for me was that like I already had body dysmorphia, and then like all of this shit happened and like it completely drags your body through hell and you just lose all sense of what you look like altogether. Like you think some days you look okay, and then some days you think that you look like shit run over, and are you bloated? Are you too skinny? Are you like, do you look okay? Like there's just this constant vacillation that goes from one day to the next that I still kind of have a little bit of, where it's like some days I'm like, oh, okay, you're looking all right. And then other days it's like, you fat bitch, like it's just kind of like, it depends on the day, but that was the biggest thing that heightened a lot during that period of time, was just understanding how I looked and who I was.
I know because my mother went through, like I think I told you over the air, my mom passed away. She had cancer, that's not what killed her, but she did have to go through chemo. And the one thing that I did notice that she even says is chemo makes her very tired. She didn't want to do anything. She didn't really feel like herself. She wanted to sleep most of the day. What was your chemo experience once you started getting it?
I mean, it was that, but I fought really hard against that. I refused basically to be a sick person. I did not want that. I didn't tell anyone that I had cancer. It was like my close friends, my family only. And I refused to stay at home. I refused to stay in bed. I got up and walked and moved around as much as I possibly could, sometimes to the point of me like almost passing out. There's a thing I write about that I passed out in the vestibule of a Chase bank. I got super disoriented on the train once and ended up in the Bronx and was like, how did I get here? Like, chemo brain is real. But it was very much that. I was tired. I didn't feel good, but I fought against it. And whether that was to my benefit or not, like, would I heal faster if I didn't? Yeah, I don't know. But, that's what I did.
The one thing I'll ask you, because, being that you survived and went through this, one thing I found out was amazing is, as you know, Chadwick Boseman died a while ago after Black Panther. Nobody knew he had it. And the most miraculous thing that everybody come to find out is the whole time we was looking at him on the screen, he was sick. Even through playing Jackie Robinson, even through the first, Black Panther. What do you think could have gave him the strength to do that? Because, I seen an interview with him right before he died where he was talking about a little girl that had cancer and he wasn't looking the greatest. And according to a podcast that's out by the producers of Black Panther, the script was already written for Black Panther 2. And he called him and said, you want to read it? And he said, no, I trust you. But the truth was he was just not at this point too tired to read it. What do you think he might have been going through at that point?
I remember hearing when he died and thinking, of course he didn't tell anyone. Think about where he was in his career, like top of his game. Like it was only going to go up from there. And the demand that would have been put on him to do interviews and do appearances and talk to people and tell them about his journey and what's going on and this, that, and the next thing and let them into that sphere. Like if he was already not feeling good, like he wasn't going to do that. And he would just have the vultures come in and pick at him. Like I just finished watching Harry and Meghan and the way that the paparazzi treated them during a period of time where their lives were not in danger or there was no imminent threat of dying. And Chadwick being this brilliant actor who had these huge box office like films happening all at once, all the while he was sick. Of course he didn't want to talk about it. He wanted to be left alone and he wanted to leave, I guess maybe the word is legacy, be that he was this big shining star and just to like go out while he's still burning bright, And instead of sitting around and talking about it, what good's that going to do? Spend time with your family.
I agree. And it's, it was sad when he went, but I had the same feeling because the press, especially when you're that big of a star, I don't think they have any empathy or sympathy. I watched the press doing true crime and I'm like, somebody's daughter died. They go, how did you feel? I'm like, how do you hell you expect them to feel?
Right.
So, when I heard he didn't have it, I was like, you can kind of tell if you were a fan of his that he was sick. But I'm like, yeah, I'm with you. So of course he didn't say it because it would have been a whirlwind up to that point.
Yeah. And looking back now at some of his later stuff, you can see it. You didn't see it at the time. You're just like, oh, you look skinny. But like now knowing it, you can look back and see like, oh, okay, yeah, things were not good. But, utmost respect for him for not using that to command a spotlight, I guess is the right word. But holy shit, what an impossible situation to be in. I didn't want to tell people because I didn't. And here's the other thing, and I will tie this in. I didn't tell people because I knew that there is a type of person that will show up when something like that is happening and try and wrap themselves in you to feel better about themselves. I usually refer to them as like trauma junkies. Like they have to be around it. And then should something happen, they're like, oh, we were best friends and I was there for him and blah, 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 blah. And I didn't tell people because of those people. I told who I needed to tell because should something have happened, I didn't want my parents or my friends or my sisters to have to deal with that person. And obviously Chadwick Boseman is infinitely more famous than I will ever be. And so having that multiplied by 1 billion because you have a global fan base, don't tell anyone. Tell your family and that's it.
So that kind of segues nicely into the next one I wanted to ask you. So we know how it affected your career. Does cancer affect your relationships other than what you just said? Because I agree with that. But does it affect your relationships and in what ways does it?
Oh, David, you have asked the question. Yes. I mean, like the simple answer is yes. How could it not? Um, to be more specific, I had one of my best friends leave me during that period of time, didn't even bother to stick around a little bit. Like, I told him I had cancer, and that was the last time I heard from him. Period. The end. Still to this day, have maybe talked to them one other time. I had a boyfriend at the time that we were talking about relocating together and, building this future together. And, he fed into that narrative while I was sick, but the whole time he was dating someone else. And by the time I found out, I was 4 rounds of chemo in and, had a really hard time dealing with that. And so I distracted myself with projects to kind of not bury that pain, but redirect it into something else and, turn it into energy that ended up being positive. And I created an online magazine for tall men, and I ran that as a business for the next 5 years after that. But I ended up killing it because it was, first of all, too much work. And it kind of reminded me of him, and I didn't want to give him the time of day. So, it changes your relationships wholeheartedly. My relationships with my family. I mean, my parents and I couldn't be closer now. My sisters and I could not be closer. Friends. I mean, I know who is going to show the fuck up for me, and I know exactly who I can count on and who I can text or call or ask for help if I need it. I know who those people are, and there's no two ways about it. I know exactly who they are, and that's it. There's nothing else to say. I know who they are, and I don't question it.
First of all, I'm sorry to hear that you went through that, because maybe I'm just a different person, but if you were my best friend at the time, I would think that would be the time to actually be the most nearest to you. This is the time you need to have your best friend and your boyfriend to come and say, let me wrap my arms around you. We're going to get through this together.
Well, I mean, unfortunately, not everyone is you, David.
Well, I just kind of question. I'm like, don't take this the wrong way. Maybe you were better without them. If this is how they drop you that easily, were they really truly your best friend? These are the times when we need people to be in our lives.
Well, and that's the second part of it, isn't it? Did I need them around? The answer is no. I think, I don't remember if it was TikTok or Instagram, but I made a quick little video about this a couple weeks ago where it was like, these people who treat you this way, who are so quick to drop you during something that's even not as serious as like having cancer, like, you don't need them. Like, feel the feelings you need to feel, but step back and realize that, like, if that's how they're going to treat you, then like, this isn't even a conversation. And like, in hindsight, and it might sound a little harsh or a little curt, but I don't miss them. I don't miss a single person that dropped me during that period of time. And, there's a couple different versions of this phrase, but I feel like, the universe's rejection is course correction, or protection is the other version of that. And so these people popping out of my life, like, the universe was protecting me from wasting energy on them.
Were you surprised by the people that actually did show up for you during this time?
No. There might be one or two that were a little bit of a surprise, but for the most part, like, the people who stuck around were the people that I was close friends with anyway.
With the cancer that you had, I know from reading about you, you were pretty much near death. Why do you think you survived it? What made you come out of that?
Oh, God. I mean, I don't know. I did everything I possibly could to not survive, like, not that I didn't want to, and I don't want to give the impression that I was like trying to unalive myself, but like, I drank my way through chemo. I fucked my way through New York City to feel better about myself. And I, went on vacations and swam in the ocean, which is not a thing you should do when you have no immune system whatsoever. And I got a parasite from that. And I was in the hospital for a week because of that. So, like, I did everything possible to have every kind of complication you could possibly imagine, or put myself in a position where I was putting myself at risk. And yet somehow I still lived. And part of that is like, I'm a fucking Clydesdale. And of course, you're not going to take me down, but the other part of that is I had a really stellar team of doctors. Like, the first hospital we started at was trash, and we moved out of it and we went over to Sloan Kettering, and it was night and day. And all of a sudden it was like, oh, this is how I'm supposed to be treated here. Got it. And the team there was second to none, and it really flipped the switch and changed the entire conversation. And so, you know, a lot of times people are like, oh my God, you survived cancer. Good job. It's like, I mean, I did everything not to. And all I did do was show up when I was told to show up. And even when I was there, I was a pain in the ass. You know, like nobody wants to sit around for 6 hours with a needle in their arm getting chemo dumped into their body or whatever, you know, like nobody wants that. And so you get defensive and you get, you know, I guess that was part of my brain not surrendering to being a sick person, was to just be a bitch. And that's not who I am, really. So like, you know, it's, I don't know. I would like to say that maybe like the universe had something in store for me that I don't fully actually realize yet. All odds were against me, whether those were self-made or otherwise, and somehow I'm still here. So, I mean, pat on the back to Sloan Kettering, I guess.
Now, you've spoken about sex, drugs, and cancer before. How does those three things correlate to each other?
Well, I mean, kind of how, like I just said, you know, there's this need to want to feel like a human being instead of like this clammy, sweaty, bald, bloated, pumped full of drugs person, you know, like that was a lot of alliteration. I love alliteration, so good for me for doing that. But you know, like you just feel like shit all the time. And so you want to do stuff that makes you feel normal. And for me, it was like, you know, I want to feel pretty. So I would go find people to like hook up with that would make me feel better for like, I don't know, 10 minutes if I was lucky. Or like, you know, I'd go out and get shit-faced with my friends because it felt normal to do. And being in a crowded bar and sucking booze down like felt normal. You know, like my poor liver, chemo and alcohol, like whose idea was that? You know, so there's a lot of like, that's, you know, and then of course, like the drugs part, like I never had really done marijuana at the time. So there's a whole story in the book about that, but also the drugs that they give you at the hospital. Like I had my first, intrathecal chemo, which is when they go through your spine. Like, you know, they screwed that up at my first hospital. And I had a pretty solid migraine for like 3 weeks and, you know, had a hard time sitting up and had a hard time being around light or anything, and it became very debilitating. And so what they gave me was Dilaudid, which is legal heroin. And so like I'm popping these pills and they were doing nothing. And so I ended up getting rid of them. But, you know, I can say that I kind of did heroin at some point because of that. You know, it's prescribed and they call it something different, but it's basically the same thing.
So if you had to compare cancer to one thing that illustrated your whole experience, what would that one thing be?
Oh my goodness. Have you ever seen those AI creations of roller coasters where the cars just go off the track and then like land on the next track and keep going? Yeah. That. You know, you're like flying up this hill and then all of a sudden you're free falling because you have no idea what's going to happen. And then somehow you land on the right track and you just keep going. I think that is the best comparison I can make.
Throughout this time, you wrote Cancer, Musical Theater, and Other Chronic Illnesses. That is your book that we keep referencing to. What made you want to write that book?
I had met another cancer survivor, which was not a thing that I had done during that period of time. I wanted to stay away from support groups because it just felt like people sitting around crying about their feelings, which are valid. And if that works for you, great. That is not how my brain works. And so, you know, I was 3 years out of being told I was cancer free at this point, and I had met up with this very attractive man, who he and I are still sort of loosely in touch these days. But you know, we had a little moment together, and he had told me that he was coming from the east side, right around where my hospital was. So I asked him why he was over there, and you know, he freaked out a little bit. I was like, hey, like, you know, I also am a cancer survivor. Like, let's talk about it. And he had just found out that he was cancer free a couple months prior and was trying to get his life back. And we had this really long conversation about how difficult it is when you're a survivor to just function. You know, you have all of this structure and this schedule and people counting on you to show up and, you know, regimens and protocols and prognoses and everything else while you're in the hospital. And it gets easy because you just are like, cool. It's like being on the roller coaster. You're just kind of like chucked into this direction and like, it doesn't feel good and it's scary, but then you land on the next track. And it's the after being a cancer patient thing during your survivorship that things get hard because now you have to do it yourself. and getting up in the morning sucks. And like listening to your friends ramble on about dumb shit that you don't care about sucks because you like these people and you want to be with these people. But why is everything coming out of your mouth make me want to slap you? You know, and like that goes true for family and other relationships and your career. Like, what am I even doing with my life? You know, it's the facing the mortality piece that you're like, well, I'm still here. So now what? You know, and so he and I had this really long conversation and I was like, this is what I want to write about, because this was never, ever once told to me that after I'm out of the hospital, things are going to be harder than they were when I was in. And so I reached out to a couple other people I knew who had had cancer at some point in various degrees, and they all said the exact same thing. And I was like, cool, that's what I'm doing. And therein lies what came of this book.
Well, now that, you know, you've been 10 years free of cancer, how has cancer changed you as a whole? Your life, your relationships, goals, how has it changed all of those?
Well, I mean, aside of the fact that I'm a totally different human than I was 10 years ago, I also think it kind of opened me up to learning more about myself in an insular kind of way, or like, I guess, introspective kind of way is the better word. Prior, I think it was just like, I was a finished product. I was like this glorious, gorgeous finished product. And like, you know, you got what you see, but it, you know, that's not all, you know, that we all know that that's not being a full human and adult. And maybe that was a symptom of being in my 20s. But, you know, after cancer to now, I think that there's definitely a different level of fear that has kind of reared up a little bit more recently with like doing these interviews and talking about my book and my cancer experience, where, you know, you had straight out the gate of being told I was cancer free. I had this really long period of being a hypochondriac and being so scared that it was coming back, and every little ache and pain was like, oh my God, is this it? Is the tumor moved? Like what's going to happen? And, you know, of course, being terrified to go to the hospital for any reason, you know, that changed the game a lot. And it's just kind of, I don't know. I'm not really sure how to answer the question. I mean, like, it's hard to articulate. I'm just a different person, you know, and I'm more willing to change and get things I want. And, you know, it became easier for me to just say like, fuck it, let's do it, than it was before. Because now, you know, being an adult, not in my early 20s, you know, you have more of the means to do so, you know, with some risk management involved, of course. But, you know, maybe again, it's my 30s, but like, I don't care. Like, let's go, let's do it. It just does. It just changes you. And I'm having a really hard time being able to articulate how and why.
I think, now I've never been through cancer. To be honest with you, it's time for me to go in for all of these miraculous checkups. I'm 50. I just turned 50 in November last year. And my doctor, I'm a diabetic, so my endocrinologist was like, it's time for you to go. And I'm not going to lie, I'm nervous about it. Cancer runs in my family. I haven't felt anything, you know, change in my body, but we all know that sometimes you don't got to feel anything for something to happen. So I started to wonder, you know, you look over your life at that point in time. What have I done? Was I really always this nice? I think things like that changes you, and it starts to. And I did notice as I get older, I'm a little bit more tolerant, you know, not as hard as I used to be on certain things. So I can totally feel you when it comes to that. I think I read somewhere too that you were part of something called Cancer Rocks. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Oh, God, what a great organization. Yes, it's headed by Jim Ebert and Butch Walker, both of whom are brilliant music producers. Jim Ebert, you would know from Meredith Brooks's hit in the late 90s, I'm a Bitch. He produced that whole album and a slew of other things. Butch Walker, of course, is a very well-known musician and producer as well. But they kind of created this not-for-profit organization to get artists who are cancer patients or survivors into a recording studio setting and record an original song of theirs. And I had someone that I went to high school with, of all things, refer me to Jim because he knew him through school. He went to Berkeley and connected me. And like within 2 days, I had a date scheduled with Jim and signed paperwork and did all the things. And I got to record this song that I had written originally when I was 20 years old. And for whatever reason, still remembered how the whole thing went. and was able to, I found the sheet music to it, and I like the old sheet music from like 20 years ago. Like, it was cool. And like to be in a studio of such high level musicians and just completely rock out with them. Like what a great, just like standing in the middle of this big sound booth that was a whole ass room with headphones on and listening to these tracks that like these dudes were just shredding guitars on and being able to sing my face off on it. Like with just, they're such good people. I cannot say enough about them. And I hope that, someday I get to work with them again, because holy shit, like they were the catalyst for me wanting to get back into songwriting and recording. They're the absolute best, and they do accept donations. So by all means, everyone go give them money. They're the best.
So speaking of that, I have got to hear at least your track Renaissancing. I went and saw the video. Tell us a little bit about Edward the First and this album that you have.
So, LOL. So Edward the First kind of came out of the pandemic, right? Like I did the Walk of Shame track with Jim down in the DC metro area at the end of 2021, I believe, and went down with my buddy Dan Pardo, who's a brilliant piano player, and we kind of like had a whole day in the studio where we put this song together. And after that, I was like, I love doing this, and I'm good at this, and I want to do this more. And I came home and I bought myself a bunch of sound equipment. Like I bought a little keyboard and some microphone stuff, like, and whatnot. And I just started writing again. And I didn't need it to be anything epic or whatever. I mean, I love epic stuff. So of course, like that's where I was headed. But songwriting wise, I was like, I just want to write fun, dumb dance songs that are like poppy and ridiculous and like have a little bit of edge of camp to them. Because I've always resonated with that as a kid, and I felt like that was not necessarily present in current pop music, and so I kind of like just wrote what I would want to listen to. And Renaissancing was always going to be the title of the album, because I felt at the time, with the pandemic and everything that was going on and the shifts in there, that I felt like I was always talking about how, there was the plague, and then Rome fell, and then like there was the Renaissance period, like the Italian Renaissance, the European Renaissance. And so it was just like this obvious, like, let's turn the word Renaissance into a verb of like, hey, like I'm Renaissancing, leave me alone. And like, I'm going to go Renaissance over here. I'll be right back. Oh, and actually like, all of these paintings back here inspired by that period, of course, with the Venus and David and Mona. But like, it just became this really fun outlet for me where I just wanted to like put on costumes and sing fun music and have a good time. And I still carry, Edward the First with me now. And I still have stuff in the pipeline to come out this year. And, it was kind of me reverting back to like my early 20s, late teens years of wanting to be a pop star. Like I wanted to be a pop bitch and just like, bounce my booty around like George Michael and, do all of that. And I never did or could or both, but now I do. So here we are.
Speaking of George Michael, I have to say I'm a huge George Michael fan. Always
Same.
have been. And when you filled out my registration and put that picture, the first thing I said is, he looks like George Michael. Have you ever heard that before?
I have. I've gone for him I've gone as him for Halloween before. I think it's just the beard. Everything else is a lie. But thank you. Yes, he was a big idol of mine growing up. He was my sex education. Like I am from the middle of Pennsylvania. No one talks about, queerness or LGBTQ outside of, and also I went to Catholic school, so that's another layer of that. But they vilify it, and so like identifying as such in an environment where like that is not celebrated or visible or talked about in a positive way at all. George Michael was the one thing I could look to be like, oh God, that's what I want to do. That's who I want to be, because it felt safe and it felt glorious. And it was just like, one day. And so now I'm getting my one day,
So in closing, if there is one thing you could say to anyone listening that is either going through cancer or has survived cancer right now, what would that be?
I feel like I could ask this question a lot and I always struggle to answer it. I think answers I've given before have been like, pay attention to who shows up for you. Is certainly one thing. Don't self-sabotage. Don't develop a drinking habit while you're going through chemo. Eat. Make yourself eat. I force-fed myself so many times that I didn't want to. Oh God. I mean, I need to come up with better answers to this question. Give yourself grace. You're allowed to feel the feelings you're feeling. They're real. You're not crazy. It's how you feel. And whether that is fueled by the hormones they're injecting in you or the drugs that they're injecting in you, you're still allowed to feel the way that you feel. And having someone that you can communicate that to will only help you in your recovery. So find a safe space with someone and talk to them.
Can you tell the audience why you think they should go out and pick up a copy of Cancer, Musical Theater, and Other Chronic Illnesses, and what you think they'll take away from it?
Well, the first answer is that I have rent to pay. No, but the other answer is because all of the feedback and reviews that I've gotten over the years from different versions of this, I had published it myself back in 2017 and pulled it down because I wasn't doing anything with it. But in the early couple months of that, I was getting feedback from medical providers who were saying that it absolutely changed their point of view of cancer care and bedside manner and humanized patients in a way that they had never considered before, were never trained to do. And so then also to what I just said about cancer patients feeling their feelings, like there's a lot in there that I'm certain that people of all different kinds of cancer can relate to. My case was very dire and very, very serious. And being able to read a scenario that isn't necessarily maybe as bad as yours, and that you can laugh at and laugh with and kind of digest in a way that is entertaining to you. Like we all need coping mechanisms and distractions. So maybe while you're going through treatment and you need something to laugh at that you can also identify with, this would be a good piece for you. I only wrote it to be entertaining, and I only wrote it to be able to tell people that, like, the story that we get from movies and TV is not the whole story. And so, of course, there is more to that, and I wanted to tell my version of that.
Well, Edward, I thank you for coming on the show today. It's been very enlightening. Thank you for opening our eyes to what cancer is like by someone who's went through it. Like you said, a lot of the things we talked about today, like what you go through, how you feel, what happens at the end of that, a lot of people or a lot of podcasts or books that we've read doesn't touch that. So I'm glad that you were able to come and share your thoughts with us today. And I haven't yet, but I'm going to be reading your book, and I would love to have you come back on the show so we can talk all about that if you'd be willing to do that.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, Edward. So I thank you for coming on the show today, and take care of yourself, and we'll be talking to you real soon.
Thank you so much, David.
All right, guys, so you heard it there. That was the incredible Edward Miskie. You can pick up his book, Cancer, Musical Theater, and Other Chronic Illnesses, anywhere books are sold, which includes Barnes & Noble. I hope you guys got a lot out of this interview today. People like Edward can show us that even though we're going through the roughest times in our lives, there is still a light at the end of the tunnel. All right, so thank you for tuning into this episode. Again, I hope you guys are doing well out there. And always remember, always stay humble. A little love and compassion goes a long way. And this is the podcast where two passions becomes one. I'll catch you guys on the next one.
Thank you for listening to True Crime and Authors. Don't forget to rate, comment, and subscribe. Join us on social media. On Facebook at True Crime and Authors. On Twitter at Authors True. On YouTube and TikTok at True Crime and Authors. And email at truecrimeandauthors@gmail.com. Cover art and logo designed by Dazzling_Ray from Fiverr. Sound mixing and editing by David McClam. Intro script by Sophie Wild from Fiverr. And I'm the voice guy, your imaging guy from Fiverr. See you next time on True Crime and Authors.